Chris. She was in love, happy, and very hopeful.
And he's gone now, but he said he's killed Karen. How can you have an excuse for hitting somebody, going to get the hammers, and hitting somebody 16 times on the head?
The first hammer broke before he was finished. He stopped, went to another room, and came back with the second one. Karen Pugh died in her own home in Barry, Wales. The home she had kept spotless for 21 years. Her husband killed her, cleaned that house, then spent the night pretending not to know where she was. A court later called what he did manslaughter. He was free in 3 years. Her family is still asking why. To understand how Christopher Pugh came to stand in that house with 2 hammers, this story starts years before, with a marriage in Barry, Wales, that had been quietly falling apart. Before the story continues, drop a quick comment below. What are you doing right now while you listen? Cooking? Driving? Or winding down for the night? You would be surprised how many people are right here with you. Every comment gets read. A quick note, some scenes have been reconstructed for audio storytelling. The people, the places, and what happened are real and documented. Karen Pugh is cleaning a house that is already clean. She is a nurse née Clee from Barry, Wales. Her professional life was built around caring for people in hospital wards in the hours when families could not reach them. Right now it is the mid-1980s. She is running a cloth across a kitchen counter that does not need her attention. The counter is spotless. The cloth moves anyway. She met Christopher Pugh at a pub in Barry in 1981. He worked as a house contractor, a man with a trade, a man who repaired and built things for a living. They married 2 months after they met. 2 months from the pub to the register. Keep that pace in mind. People in Barry noted it said something polite and moved on. 4 children came in the years that followed. Karen carried her nursing career through all of it. The night shifts, the ward rounds, the long drive home, and then the house. She was known at work as careful and competent. At home, she was the same. By the mid-1980s, the Pugh household had 4 children, a working mother, a contractor father. From any angle outside, it looked exactly like the life Karen had always said she wanted. Kathleen Clee, Karen's mother, came to visit and saw a daughter who had built that life. Peter Clee, her father, sat at the kitchen table and agreed. They were not wrong about what they saw. They were only seeing the outside of it. When everything looks right, what you are seeing is often only what is being shown to you. Notice what no one in Barry noticed. 3 things. First, the house was not just clean, it was attended to the way a person attends to something they cannot afford to let go. The kind of clean that removes every trace of the cleaning itself. The effort was enormous and invisible. Second, Christopher drank at weekends, not dramatically. Not in a way that broke anything obvious, just reliably every Saturday, every Sunday, the same. Third, the front door of the Pugh house stuck. Everyone who visited had to lean into it and pull hard against the frame before it released. They laughed about it on the step and forgot it by the time they sat down. The house smelled of cleaning product beneath everything else, under the warmth, under the food, under the noise of a family. Not sharp, just permanent. The scent of something that had been running a long time. 3 things: a spotless house, a husband who drank at weekends, and a front door that stuck. Nobody in Barry thought much about any of them. 21 years later, that would turn out to matter. Chris waited until after the wedding to tell her the first thing. They had been married a matter of weeks. The house was already clean. Karen was already learning its rhythms the way a new home settles around the person who tends it. The particular silence of a late evening. The 2 of them at the kitchen table after the children were in bed. That was when he told her. The woman he had always called his sister was not. She was his biological mother. He had discovered this at 16 and had carried it since alone until that evening. He said it plainly, the way a person delivers something they have been holding for a long time. Karen listened. She did not know yet that he had chosen this moment deliberately. After the wedding, after the answer to what she would do about it had already been made irreversible, a confidence shared can feel like a gift. It can also arrive as a debt, something that changes the air of a room without appearing to. Kathleen Klee had watched the early months of the marriage. She saw her daughter organizing her life around a man she had known for 8 weeks. The effort Karen made, the particular care she took, Kathleen watched. There was nothing yet she could have pointed to. The first question came not long after. "Where were you?" Karen had been 10 minutes later than expected. She explained. She named the reason, the route, the delay. She gave the account as though it was owed because it had been asked as though it was owed. She looked across the table at him while she spoke, reading his face to make sure the answer had landed. "Who was that on the phone?" He called it concern. She answered that one too. She gave the name, the reason for the call, the length of it. She was careful. She wanted to be careful. It felt at the time like what a serious marriage required of a person who took it seriously. She did not yet understand that this was not a question. It was a system. Every absence would need an account. Every caller named, every delay explained. The system did not announce itself. That was what made it effective. By 1982, the routine was complete. She answered before she had finished deciding to. The response arrived ahead of the decision. That is what daily practice does. It removes the choosing from it. What begins as an answer becomes a reflex. She could not have named the day it changed. Karen answered every question Christopher Pugh ever asked her. The first time she had 4 words. Those 4 words explained the next 20 years. The questions had a rhythm by then. Daily, unremarkable. Where were you? Who was that? How long? Karen gave answers. The habit had settled into her days, and she no longer noticed when it had started. He had also found other ways to ask. Bridget was a friend of Karen's in Barrie. She heard the knock on a weekday afternoon small. Uncertain, the kind of knock a child makes when they have been told to knock, but not too loud. She opened the door to 2 small faces. Young. Careful in the way children are careful when they have been given an errand and told to do it properly. "Have you seen our mum?" She had not. She said so, and she asked if they were all right. They said yes. They thanked her the way children thank you when they have been reminded to, and they turned back toward the street. Bridget watched them go. The afternoon was quiet. A terraced street midweek, no traffic, a distant dog. The sound of her own step beneath her. The children walked in a straight line toward the curb. There was a white van parked at the end of the road. She noticed it the way you notice something out of place, not immediately. Not with alarm, but with a small catch in the looking. The van was plain, white. No markings she could read from where she stood. What held her was the figure above the bonnet, the top of a man's head tilted slightly forward. Eyes she could not make out at that distance. Still as a man who had been waiting there for a while. Aimed at her door. He was not at work. He was across the road. This is what coercive control looks like before anyone has a name for it. No raised voice. No scene. A van in a quiet street. 2 children carrying a question their father composed. A man watching from a distance close enough to see results, far enough to deny he was there. Bridget looked toward the van. The children had reached it. They stopped at the side. She could not hear what passed between them. The van door did not open. She stood in her doorway a moment longer than she needed to. The man above the bonnet did not wave. He did not look away. He stayed exactly where he was. She understood without finding the word for it that he had been there before she opened the door. He would still be there after she closed it. She had no name for the shape of what she had just seen. A husband looking for his wife, using his own children to do it. Strange was the word she settled on, and strange was a word that did not reach anyone who needed to hear it. She told herself it was strange, and she closed the door. Bridget closed the door, and the street went quiet, and nobody said anything to anyone. Not then. Someone else did. Peter Clay sat in his daughter's living room and waited for the man who had done this to her. Karen was in the room, bruised, crying in the particular way people cry when they are trying not to, the crying that looks like stopping. He had seen her face when he came in and said nothing about it because saying something about it was not the point. He sat down in a chair and he waited. He had been thinking about this on the drive over. Not whether to say something, that was decided before he started the engine. What he was thinking about was what to say. A general warning was useless. Raise your hand to my daughter again, and you'll regret it. That kind of sentence lands in the air and evaporates. A man who had already done this once would hear it as permission to be more careful next time. Peter needed something that would not evaporate. Karen did not ask what he planned. She had not asked since he sat down. The marks on her face were visible from where he sat, and neither of them spoke about that. Chris came home. The chair emptied. Peter was not a big man. He had prepared for that. He looked at Chris and told him he knew which tree. He knew which bush. He knew which corner. He did not say what he would do from those positions. He did not need to. The specificity was the point. It told Chris that this was not grief talking, not anger making promises it couldn't keep. It was planning. Already laid. Already done. I know which tree, Peter said. I know which bush. I know which corner. Chris heard all of it. Then Chris laughed. It was not discomfort, not nerves wearing the shape of amusement. It was a genuine laugh, brief, clear. The laugh of a man who has weighed the thing in front of him and found it light. 1 moment, that was all it lasted. But 1 moment was enough for Peter to understand exactly what he was dealing with. Peter looked at him. I don't joke about things. Chris stopped laughing. He said nothing else. He turned and walked out the door. The room went still. Just Peter and Karen and the closed door between them and the silence it left. The door opened again a few minutes later. Chris had not gone far, there was not far enough in that street to go, and he had not needed much time. He came back through the door, and he did not come back alone. His sisters came with him, unnamed, arriving as a group at his call, the reinforcement he chose over retreat. The answer to one man standing in a room was not to argue. It was to fill the room until arguing was beside the point. Chris had brought them for exactly this. 3 women already briefed, already certain. Peter was still in the room, but the room had changed around him. They came in 3, and they had already decided what had happened. Karen was in the room where they were saying it, standing in a house she had cleaned, listening to women she had not invited. The accusation did not need to build the argument, had been assembled somewhere else before they arrived. She was provoking him. Everyone knew it. The bingo nights, the absences, that a decent wife didn't accumulate. She knew she did it. They said it the way people say things they have been told so many times, the telling becomes automatic. The words arrived before any thought about whether they were true. You provoke him. You know you do. She said nothing. This is the architecture of it. A woman bruised in her own house is told the bruises are her fault, by people who have no reason not to believe it because they have heard only one account. Chris had given them the account. They had accepted it because it came from someone they trusted. That is not stupidity. That is how it works. Among the 3 was the woman Chris calls his sister. Karen knew which one. She had carried what she knew since shortly after the wedding. It sat in her like a stone with no use here, his biological mother, standing in her living room, accusing her of provocation. Karen did not say what she knew. She could have named it the woman's real place in Chris's history, the thing only she and Chris shared between them. She did not. There was nothing in that room that the truth could open. The bingo. That was his explanation. Knowledge is not protection. In that room, the people with fewer facts were the ones with the floor. Karen stood with everything she knew, and it gave her nothing to stand on. Lorraine, one of the women Chris called his sisters, had already been here before. On an earlier occasion, with a piece of wood. Now she spoke the way someone speaks who has done this before and found it effective. This was not the first visit. That matters. 3 women delivering a verdict in Karen's living room was not the beginning of anything. It was part of something already in motion. The first time Lorraine had come, she had come alone and not empty-handed. Now there were 3 of them, and the only person standing on her own side of the room was the one they were all talking about. Peter left not long after. He had arrived that afternoon as a consequence, a father who intended to be heard. He walked out with less than he had brought in. The room he left behind was not the room he had entered. The lie had its believers now. People who had heard one side and closed around it. They believed him and they didn't see 2 sides of it. Nobody had seen 2 sides of it. That was what the lie counted on. It settled into the world around Karen the way furniture settles unmovable present, eventually unremarked upon. The curtains were drawn in the middle of the day, and Peter Klee had never seen that before. He came into the room and stood. Karen was lying on the bed, eyes open or opened when he entered. The curtains were heavy enough to hold the afternoon out, and in that low light, she looked like a person who had decided to stop. Not to end things, just to stop moving for a while. He did not tell her to get up. He crossed to the bed and sat on the edge of the mattress. The spring gave under him. She did not move. He knew the difference from years of being the person people called. The difference between grief that was still moving and grief that had set hard in the bones. He had sat at enough bedsides to recognize the second kind. This was it. They stayed like that for a while. Then she spoke.
Even doing a 13-hour-a-day working, there was nothing out of place.
Her voice was quiet and flat. Not broken, but emptied out. The way a thing sounds when it has been said so many times it no longer costs anything to say out loud. She was not performing sorrow. She had arrived somewhere past it. "I only wanted to be like you and Mum," she said. Peter did not answer straight away. The room was very quiet. Outside somewhere, an afternoon was happening, traffic birds, the ordinary noise of a street. None of it came through the curtains. He sat with what she had said until it was fully in the room. She had a plan. She had always had a plan, she told him. She would leave when the children were grown. She had done the arithmetic. A nurse's wage could not support 4 children alone, not at their current ages. She knew this not as a feeling, but as fact. The numbers had been run and they did not work. Not yet. This is what coercive control looks like from the inside. Not confusion, not helplessness, but total clarity about a trap with visible walls and a locked door. Karen could see every dimension of what she was in. She could name the exit. She just could not reach it. "When the children are grown," she said, "that's when I'll go." Peter sat on the mattress and heard his daughter tell him the things she had already decided. She was not asking for rescue. She had already calculated the earliest possible moment, and she was holding that date in herself the way you hold a key to a door that cannot yet open. She was not confused, not defeated, waiting. Karen Pugh knew exactly what she was going to do, and exactly when she was going to do it. She was right about the timing. That was the whole tragedy of it. The timing had been right. It had always been about the timing. In February 2002, with the children nearly grown, she went to Spain. Karen came back from Spain with color in her face and something behind her eyes that had not been there before. A week in Torrelinos. She had been away before. A nurse with 4 children finds ways to leave the house, but not like this. She came back from this particular week changed. Not dramatically and not in a way she wore loudly. But it was there in her face, in the way she moved through a room. Anyone who had known her face settled into its usual flatness over the years would have seen it. Something that had been held in place for a very long time had shifted. She held it for a while. She carried it back on the flight through the first days at work, through the weeks that settled around her again. She was not someone who spoke before she was ready. When she was ready, she told Kathleen. It had happened in Spain. A man she had met, John, a landscape gardener, 51 years old from near Cardiff, already married when he sat down beside her. He had listened to her. He had been present in the way that some people are present, the kind of attention that registers what you say and answers it. He had at some point during that week bought her flowers. He bought me flowers, Karen told her. Kathleen listened. Karen's voice was even measured. The voice of someone who has been carrying a fact for weeks and is only now setting it down. In 21 years, no one had done that, she said. 21 years. Not once. For 21 years, Chris had told anyone who would listen that Karen was unfaithful. He had told his sisters. He had told people in their world. He had built his entire case on the questions, the surveillance, what his hands had done on the story of a wife who was always somewhere else with someone else. He had never produced evidence. The accusation did not require any. It was a tool, not a verdict. He had been wrong entirely, completely, for every single year of it. And the punishment for that lie had fallen on Karen anyway. John, from near Cardiff, already married, had bought a woman flowers on a holiday in Torrelinos. Karen was a nurse in Barry who had been waiting with great precision for her children to grow. She had been faithful for 2 decades to a man who accused her of the opposite every single day. She was about to be faithful no longer. Christopher Pugh had called his wife unfaithful for 21 years. He had been wrong every single time. He was about to be right once. Karen Pugh moved out of the marital home in spring 2002 and went back to where she had started. The Clee house. Peter and his wife. The same street in Barry where she had grown up knowing people who would open the door. She took what she needed. She left what she couldn't carry. Samantha stayed behind. 15 years old. The youngest of the Pugh children still at home. Old enough to notice, not old enough to leave. The older children had their own lives by then. Deanne had her own place. Samantha did not. So Samantha stayed with Chris in the marital home while her mother moved 2 streets away and tried to work out what came next. Chris did not stay in the house and wait. That was never how it worked with him. He had a version of events. He always had a version, and in his version, Karen was confused. She was making a mistake. She was going through something, and when she came through it, she would understand. He was patient in the way that certain people are patient, not because they have accepted the outcome, but because they have not. He drove to the Clee house. The first time, he knocked. Peter answered. The conversation did not go the way Chris had hoped. He came back. He knocked again. He was not aggressive, not exactly. Not in front of Peter, not at the door. He was reasonable. He was calm. He explained. Then he came with Samantha. He brought chocolates. That detail stayed with the people who heard it later. Not a threat, not a confrontation. Chocolates for the house, held in his hands when Samantha stood beside him at the Clee door. He was doing something normal. He was doing what you do when you visit someone. The chocolates were meant to say, "This is not a problem. We are fine. We are sorting this out." He looked at Samantha and said it simply. "Your mum and dad are getting back together. Not I hope. Not I'm working on it. Present tense. Settled. Fact." He said it to a 15-year-old girl standing at a door in Barrie, and he said it the way a man says something he has already decided is true. Karen heard it from inside the house. She did not come to the door. Peter heard it. His wife heard it. Samantha heard it and believed it because her father said it and he sounded certain. He was certain. That was the thing no one could quite explain later. Not the chocolates, not the visits, not the calm. He was not performing certainty, he felt it. The marriage was fixable. Karen was coming home. He had decided. Christopher Pugh stood at the Clee door with chocolates and told his daughter her parents were getting back together. He believed it. That was the most dangerous thing about him. Deanne, one of the adult Pugh children, Karen's daughter, saw him before he saw her. Chris was pacing the pavement outside her grandparents' house, and he had a gun. This was the evening of approximately June 19, 2002, a Wednesday in Barrie. The street was residential and quiet. Nothing moved that shouldn't be moving except the man on the pavement and what he was holding. She stood back and watched. He was not hiding. He paced the way a person paces when they have made a decision and are waiting for the right moment. The handgun was visible. He made no effort to conceal it. She did not call the police that night. She went to Karen. That choice is not difficult to understand. She had lived inside what he was for the whole of their marriage. If anyone could read what a gun in his hand meant, it was her. Deanne waited until Thursday morning, June 20. She sat with her mother in the Clee house and told her what she had seen Chris street the gun. Then she said what anyone who had seen it would say. The gun was for John. That was what he said. Chris had stood outside a house in Barrie with a handgun, announcing to the dark that he intended to shoot the man Karen had left him for. He had not pulled the trigger yet, but the intention was out in the open. Deanne had heard it said aloud. "You need to go to the police," she told Karen. Karen listened. She didn't reach for the phone. She didn't look surprised. There was something in her face that wasn't alarm, it was recognition. She had been running this calculation for a long time. This was not the first time she had heard something like this about him. Before we reach what Karen said in answer, the detail that changes how everything reads, drop one word in the comments for what you're feeling right now. A quick note. What follows draws on family testimony. The core is documented, some framing is adapted for the telling. Karen had known Chris for the whole of their marriage. She had been the target of his suspicion, his control, his violence. She had a precise understanding of where his anger moved and where it stopped. She believed in that moment that she knew the boundary exactly. She looked at Deanne and said it with a steadiness that was harder to argue with than alarm would have been. "He'll never hurt anyone but me." It sounded like reassurance. It was something more precise, an accounting of the man. She had mapped his violence. She knew what it was capable of and what it would spare. Deanne heard it as comfort. She heard her mother say the danger has an edge and the edge is me. Karen told Deanne not to worry. Chris would never hurt anyone but her. In 48 hours, that would be the most accurate thing anyone had said about Christopher Pugh in 21 years. Karen told her mother she would not be late and walked out into a Saturday. The date was June 22, 2002. Noon. Kathleen stood at the door of the Clee house and watched her go. The afternoon was in front of Karen, the light, the street, the ordinary certainty of someone who had somewhere to be and expected to come home. She had said, "I won't be late." Not goodbye, not take care, just the forward-leaning words of a woman with a plan. Kathleen heard them and stood at the door until the street was empty. The 2 days since Deanne's warning had passed without incident. Chris had not come to the door. The gun had not appeared again. The world had continued to present itself as manageable. Karen had a Saturday and a reason to spend it. She had taken that for what it seemed to be. She drove to Cardiff. She spent the afternoon with John. At some point during those hours, she picked up her phone and sent him a message. The words were short and warm. "Missing you already, Jay." The kind of thing people send when they are still inside the warmth of something. A small private record of a Saturday afternoon that was going the way a Saturday afternoon should go. She drove back toward Barry when the afternoon began to wind down. Chris was somewhere on that route home. The precise circumstances of how he persuaded her to stop are not fully documented. What is known is that she went with him into the old house. The house on the street in Barry where she had lived across the whole of her marriage and which she had left in the spring. She knew every room in it. She had known them for longer than she had known anything else. She always left her phone in the bathroom. She always had. A shelf face down the same place every time. A habit so ordinary it had never needed to be thought about. She set the phone there and went on with whatever came next. The house was quiet around her. The light inside was different from the light she had driven home through. Chris picked up the phone. He did not have to search or wait. Whatever was on the screen was there immediately, the message, the name, the notification that had not yet been cleared. He stood in the bathroom of the house in Barry with Karen's phone in his hand and read what was on it. That was the geometry of it. She had left the life beyond the walls of this house piece by piece over the months since February. She had not hidden it beyond ordinary privacy. She had left her phone on a shelf. She put the phone on the shelf in the bathroom the way she always did. He picked it up. 2 words and an initial. That was all it took. Chris walked to a shop and bought a bottle of whiskey, and a security camera recorded every second of it. This was approximately 5:30 p.m. He moved through the frame the way a man moves when he has an ordinary evening ahead. Upright, composed, money on the counter, unhurried. The camera did not know what was inside the Pugh house. It only recorded what it saw a man buying whiskey on a Saturday. He went back to the house. The house Karen had always kept spotless. He cleaned it now. The same floors, the same surfaces, the work she had always done in the home she had left in the spring. He cleaned it as though she were still the reason. Karen was inside it. The security footage would become evidence in the weeks that followed. Not an alibi, as it turned out, but a document. A record of a man performing the ordinary shape of a Saturday evening, while something that was not ordinary at all was in the house behind him. At approximately 6:20 p.m., he picked up the phone and called the Clee house. Kathleen answered. "Is Karen there?" he asked. She was not. Kathleen said so. He thanked her and hung up. The voice on the line had been patient, the measured tone of a husband checking in. Nothing in it that would cause alarm. He waited and called again. The question at 7 p.m. was the same question it had been at 6:20. The Clay house received the call. Kathleen answered again. He asked the question. She gave the same answer. No, Karen was not there. He hung up. Outside the window of the Pugh house, the evening was doing what evenings do in Barry on a Saturday in June. Nothing was visibly wrong. 3 calls. Same question. Each time. The calls came at 6:20, at 700, and at 10:10 that evening. The third time the phone rang, Peter answered. He heard the voice that had been at the door, and in the street, the voice that had stood outside his house with a gun. Now it was on the phone asking the same question for the third time. Between the calls, Chris walked the streets of Barry and went to the bingo hall. For the whole of the marriage, he had accused Karen of going to the bingo to meet men. The bingo was his word for the hours when she wasn't home, the evenings he spent building the case against her. Now he stood in the doorway of the hall on a Saturday night and looked around the room. He scanned the tables. She was not there. He already knew that. Does that sound like a man searching? Or a man who needed to be seen searching? He left and made the last call. "Stop phoning," Peter said. Peter Klee told him to stop phoning. Chris still had the whiskey. He still had somewhere to be. Mo's kitchen, the middle of the night. Chris had somewhere to be, and this was it. He had walked in with the whiskey and sat down. The night arranged itself around him the way nights do when someone arrives with something to say. Mo sat across the table and listened. She was a woman in Barrie whose kitchen Chris walked into on the night of June 22, 2002. Her phone call the following morning would set everything that came next in motion. But that was still hours away. For now, there was only the kitchen light and the sound of his voice. He talked about his marriage. He talked about Karen, the length of the marriage, the separations, the difficulties. He talked the way a man talks when his wife has gone missing and he needs someone to understand the situation. The voice was steady. The narrative was organized. It had the quality of something that had been prepared, not word for word, but in structure, in shape, in what it chose to include. Mo listened. She made tea, or she sat still, or she said the small things people say when someone is in distress. The kitchen held them both. Outside, the streets of Barrie were quiet and dark, and the hours moved. He talked about the marriage. He talked about Karen. The night passed around the two of them. Chris's voice filled the kitchen. The hours moved the way hours move when no one wants them to end and no one wants them to continue. Outside the window, the dark stayed dark. Inside, the light stayed on. At some point during the night, the texture of it changed. Chris was still talking, but the words had shifted. He was speaking about her in the past tense. Mo noticed. She did not say anything. She held it the way you hold something with no safe place to be put down. He kept talking, the same steady voice, the same organized account, and every word from that point forward landed differently. The window behind him began to show the first gray of morning. Mo had not slept. She had sat where she was and listened, and the window had shown her the hours passing without her asking it to. He stopped. There was no wind down, no trailing off. He simply reached the end of the night and stopped. The performance, and that was what it had been, did not collapse. It ended. He sat in Mo's kitchen in the early morning of June 23, 2002, and the talking was over. Then he told her. He said what he had done. The words were plain, unhurried, without ceremony, the same voice he had been using all night. She sat in the quiet, with the kitchen light on. He stood up. He told her he had killed Karen. Then he walked out into the morning. Mo sat in her kitchen with what he had left her, and at 8:30 she picked up the phone. Pauline's phone rang at 8:30, and by the time she reached the house, she already knew something was wrong. Mo had called her. Pauline was the woman on the other end of the line, the one who drove to the Pugh house that morning and stood at the front door. She could not get it open. The front door had stuck for as long as anyone had been visiting the house. Every visitor knew this. You had to pull it at a particular angle, apply the right pressure, or it simply wouldn't give. For 2 decades, it had been a minor inconvenience, the kind of domestic detail that gets mentioned and forgotten, the kind that generates a small joke and nothing more. On the morning of June 23, 2002, it was the thing that stood between Pauline and what was inside. It had always been just a door. It had always been exactly this door. The police arrived 2 minutes later. Karen was found at 9:08 a.m. She had been killed by 16 blows to the head. The house Chris had cleaned the night before was not as clean as he had made it. Houses hold evidence the way walls hold damp. The damage shows eventually, regardless of what has been done to the surface. Kathleen and Peter were told that morning. The daughter who had said, "I won't be late," had not come home. She had been in the house the whole time. The phone had rung and rung in the Clee house that same evening, and the man on the other end had asked if she was there. Chris was somewhere else by then. He had left Mo's kitchen before dawn, and the morning had moved on without him. He walked into a police station and said he believed he had committed a crime. This was at 3:30 p.m. on June 23, 2002. He presented himself at the desk, calmly, the same composure that had carried him through the night before. And he said it, "I believe I've committed a crime, but I can't remember it." He had described every detail to Mo at dawn. By the afternoon, the memory was gone, not the act itself, but the admission. The performance had not ended with the surrender. It had simply changed its shape. Several months later, Deanne sat across from him in a prison visiting room. He talked about what he had done to Karen, the way a person might discuss a journey they had taken. He spoke the way a man speaks when he has already filed the thing away, not confessing, not boasting, simply accounting. The weight of it entirely absent from his voice, Deanne listened. She did not have a word for what she was hearing. There may not be one. Christopher Pugh told the police he could not remember what he had done. He had told Mo everything 6 hours earlier. 11 months later, a courtroom would decide what that was worth. The trial opened in Cardiff Crown Court in May 2003. It was 11 months since Karen Pugh had last walked out of that bathroom. Her husband stood before a jury. The defense strategy was provocation. Under the Homicide Act 1957, provocation was a partial defense to murder. If accepted by the jury, it reduced the charge to manslaughter. The argument was specific. Christopher Pugh had read his wife's text. He had found out about John. He had lost control. That was the case. John was called to testify. The man Karen had spent her last afternoon with walked into the courtroom and answered questions. He answered questions about June 22nd. He answered questions about the text message. He described what he and Karen had been to each other. He said it in front of a jury. He said it in front of the man who had killed her. The defense built its case around what Karen had done. Not what Christopher Pugh had done to Karen, what Karen had done to him. The jury heard it. The law gave them a structure for agreeing. They agreed. The verdict was manslaughter, not murder. The judge spoke before sentencing. His words are on record. He looked at Christopher Pugh and said he was sorry. He expressed sympathy for what Pugh had endured, the affair, the text message, the breakdown of his marriage, the loss of the life he had known. He wanted the man before him to know that the court understood. Deanne was in the courtroom. So was Samantha. The judge addressed Christopher Pugh directly. He did not address Karen's daughters. He did not speak to Peter Clee. He did not mention Mo, who had sat alone in her kitchen until 8:30 in the morning. He did not acknowledge Pauline, who had stood at a front door that wouldn't open. He said he was sorry to the man who had struck Karen 16 times. That is what the record shows. The courtroom does not record everything. It records verdicts. It records what lawyers say on behalf of their clients. It recorded provocation. It recorded manslaughter. It recorded the judge's words to Christopher Pugh. It did not record Deanne's face when a judge named her father's grief a mitigating factor. It did not record what Samantha heard. The law existed as it existed. A sudden and temporary loss of control rendering the accused not master of his mind. Karen's affair met the standard. 16 blows and a night of careful performance did not change the verdict. They were part of the record. They were not the question the jury had been asked. The sentence was read aloud in Cardiff Crown Court. How long Christopher Pugh would serve was now a number. What that number meant was something each person in that courtroom would carry differently. Deanne would carry it one way. The judge would carry it another. In 2006, Christopher Pugh walked out of prison and went back to work as a house contractor in Barrie. He had served 3 years. The sentence was 6. 3 years for what happened in that house on June 22nd. And then he was back in the same town, in the same streets, doing the same work. The interval between his conviction and his return was 3 years. Karen's children were already learning to live without her. They did it for 3 years while the law ran its course, and then they kept doing it. 3 years. The Clee family knows the weight of that number. He served those years inside a prison. They served the same years outside one. The calendar moved the same for everyone. The days did not feel the same. Karen's 4 children no longer speak to one another. The family she held together for the whole of her marriage did not hold without her. She had been the one who made the contact, the one who kept the connections open. When she was gone, the connections went with her. Peter Clee went to the cemetery. He went back more than once in the months and years that followed. There was one night when he could not make himself leave, could not make himself accept in any real way that Karen was there, in the ground, in a place that did not change. He lay down beside her grave. He stayed until morning. He says he still hurts, not past tense, present. Grief does not have a resolution in this case. It has a cemetery in Barrie and a father who goes back to it. It has Kathleen's unanswered question. It has 4 children who no longer sit at the same table. 250 people came to Karen Pugh's funeral. 250. That is the number of people who knew her as a nurse, as a mother, as the woman whose house in Barrie was always immaculate. She had kept it that way for 21 years. Every day of her marriage, every surface, every room. That house is where she died. After she died in it, Christopher Pugh cleaned it. He cleaned it before anyone came. The same house Karen had spent 2 decades caring for, cleaned by the man who killed her in it. She kept it because that was who she was. He cleaned it because of what he had done. Karen Pugh was a nurse. She was a mother. She was the person 250 people came to say goodbye to. She had spent 21 years trying to hold a family together, and she had finally decided to leave the marriage. She had told the people she trusted that she was leaving. She was killed before she could. For 21 years, Chris Pugh told a lie about his wife. The day she made it true, he killed her for it, and the court of law called that a reason. That is where Karen Pugh's story ends, with a question still unanswered and a family still living with what the law decided.
She said he just does it. He's always done it.
Karen was a nurse, a mother, and the kind of person 250 people came to honor at her funeral. She had finally found the courage to leave. What happened to her and what followed in that courtroom is a case that stayed with a lot of people and still does.
I may be little, but I'm not scared.
The law that allowed a provocation defense in Karen's case no longer exists in the same form. It was reformed years after her death. That is one small thing that came from cases like hers. It does not balance what was lost, but it means her story did not go unheard. If this case stayed with you, please leave a comment below. Share your thoughts or let someone else know this story is here. Subscribing keeps these cases coming to you, and every share puts a real story in front of someone who might need to hear it. This story is based on real documented events. Some scenes were reconstructed and dramatized for audio storytelling, but the core facts, the people, the verdict, and the outcome are real.
She said,
She only wanted to be like you and Mum.